History likes to remember the Great Wall of China. It likes to talk about the Silk Road. But history often whispers about the 40 million souls who vanished in the dust of the 13th century. That wasn't just a number. That was 1 out of every 10 people on the face of the earth. If you lived between the years 1206 and 1368, the sound of horse hooves on the horizon didn't mean trade. It didn't mean visitors. It meant the end of your world. The Mongols didn't just conquer land. They harvested lives with the cold, rhythmic precision of a machine. They turned fear into a science. They turned death into an art form. This is not a story of heroes. This is a journey into the darkest methods of the most feared army to ever walk the sand. The Mongol Empire was not just a group of warriors. It was a storm. When Genghis Khan united the nomadic tribes of the Mongolian steppe, he didn't just build an army. He built a weapon designed to do one thing: delete civilizations. To understand the Mongols, you have to understand the scale of the horror. We're talking about 40 million people dead. To put that in perspective, imagine 10% of the modern world simply being wiped away. No traces, no survivors, just silence. The Mongols were pioneers of a concept the world had never seen: total war. For them, there was no difference between a soldier on the battlefield and a baker in a shop. Everyone was a target. Every city was a project. And the methods they used to achieve this dominance were not just cruel. They were calculated. They didn't kill because they were angry. They killed because it was efficient. They treated the destruction of a kingdom like a clerk treats a ledger. Let's look at the Battle of Legnica in 1241. This happened in Poland. The Mongols had moved across the world like a plague of locusts. At Legnica, they faced a coalition of the best warriors Europe had to offer. High-ranking Polish soldiers, brave Moravian troops, even the legendary Templars and Teutonic Knights. These were men who lived for the sword. They were armored. They were trained. They were elite. It didn't matter. The Mongol army crushed them. The battlefield was a mess of iron and blood. But once the fighting stopped, the Mongols didn't celebrate. They didn't rest. They had work to do. They needed an accurate count of the dead. They didn't want estimates. They wanted facts. So, they began a process that sounds like something out of a nightmare. They walked across the field body by body. They didn't look at faces. They didn't check for rank. They simply took a knife and sliced the right ear off every single corpse. Imagine the sound. Thousands of blades moving through flesh in the silence after a battle. When they were finished, the ears were gathered into sacks. Huge, heavy sacks made of rough fabric. They filled 9 of them. 9 large bags overflowing with human ears. This wasn't done for trophies. It was done for documentation. They needed to report back to the Great Khan with proof of their success. The ear was the receipt for the life they had taken. This mechanical approach to slaughter is what made them different. Other armies might kill in a fit of rage or a rush of adrenaline. The Mongols killed like they were filing a report. In Bulgaria and Russia, reports surfaced of the same thing. Same method, same sacks, same cold indifference. To the Mongols, a human life was worth exactly 1 ear and 1 entry in a military log. This was the foundation of their power. They stripped away the humanity of their enemies until they were nothing more than a number in a bag. But ear collecting was just the beginning. It was an administrative task. The real horror started when they decided that killing the people wasn't enough. Sometimes, they decided to kill the future itself. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. If you think the Mongols were just mindless barbarians, you are wrong. They were engineers. But they didn't just build bridges and roads. They engineered terror. They understood a fundamental truth of war. You don't have to kill every soldier to win. You only have to kill their hope. Once the Mongols arrived at the gates of a city, the clock began to tick. If the city surrendered immediately, some might live. If they resisted, the Mongols ensured that the world would forget that city ever existed. This was psychological warfare practiced with a cruelty that the modern world still struggles to comprehend. They wanted the defenders inside the walls to feel the weight of their own doom before a single Mongol soldier even climbed a ladder. One of their most effective tools for this was the catapult. Usually a catapult is for rocks. It is for breaking wood and stone. But the Mongols realized that stones don't scream. Stones don't have families. So, they changed the ammunition. They began to gather the bodies of the people they had already killed in the surrounding villages. They would decapitate them. Thousands of heads. Then, they would load these heads into their siege engines. Imagine you are a guard on a city wall. You are tired. You are hungry. You are looking out at a sea of black Mongol tents. Suddenly, you hear the familiar thud of a catapult firing. You look up, expecting a boulder. Instead, you see something small and dark flying through the gray sky. It lands at your feet with a wet, heavy sound. You look down. It is your neighbor, or your brother, or the merchant you bought bread from yesterday. The Mongols didn't just rain fire, they rained grief. They forced the besieged to live among the rotting faces of their loved ones. The smell of death didn't just come from the battlefield anymore. It was inside your home. It was in your streets. Every time a head flew over the wall, the message was clear. This is you tomorrow. This wasn't random cruelty. It was a calculated investment. A city that was terrified was a city that would eventually snap. The Mongols knew that human beings can fight a sword, but they cannot fight the image of their child's head landing in the town square. They used this tactic to break the will of entire empires. It worked. When the psychological pressure wasn't enough, they turned to the environment. They practiced a form of scorched earth that went beyond just burning crops. In places like Persia and Central Asia, the people relied on complex, ancient irrigation systems called qanats. These were underground tunnels that brought water to the desert. They had been built over centuries. They were the lifeblood of the land. The Mongols didn't just destroy the people. They destroyed the land's ability to support life. They filled the tunnels with dirt and rocks. They broke the dams. They diverted the rivers. They turned gardens into dust bowls. They realized that a sword kills once, but thirst kills forever. Some of those regions in modern-day Iran and Iraq never recovered. The dust you see there today is, in part, a legacy of the Mongol arrival. They didn't just want to win the war. They wanted to win the future. They wanted the mere mention of their name to cause a surrender 1,000 miles away. And if a city still refused to open its gates, then the Mongols would show them why mercy was a word they didn't translate into their language. They would wait, they would watch, and they would let the city eat itself alive. The Mongols were masters of patience. If a city's walls were too high or its gates too thick, they didn't waste lives in a direct assault. They simply stopped time. They encircled the city like a ring of iron. No one entered. No one left. They called it a siege, but for those trapped inside, it was a slow-motion execution. They blocked every road, every hidden path, and every waterway. They sat outside in their tents, eating well, hunting in the nearby forests, and waiting. Inside the walls, the atmosphere changed within weeks. First, the luxuries disappeared. Then the staples. Then the hope. The Mongols watched as smoke stopped rising from the city's chimneys. They knew what was happening. They knew that when a human being is hungry enough, the thin veneer of civilization peels away like dead skin. People began to eat their horses, then their dogs, then the leather from their own shoes. There are accounts from these sieges that are too dark for most history books. Stories of mothers looking at their children with eyes full of a terrible, hollow desperation. The Mongols didn't need to fire a single arrow. They let the city's own stomach do the work for them. When disease eventually followed the hunger, as it always does, the city became a tomb before the gates even opened. Typhus and plague spread through the packed, starving streets like wildfire. By the time the defenders finally surrendered, they weren't soldiers anymore. They were walking skeletons, eyes sunken, skin clinging to bone. And here is the most chilling part. The Mongols still killed them. The siege wasn't a negotiation. It was a demonstration. They wanted the next city on the horizon to hear the screams of the starving. They wanted the world to know that resisting the Khan didn't lead to a heroic death in battle. It led to a pathetic, lonely death in a dark alley, chewing on a piece of boiled belt. But sometimes, the Mongols were in a hurry. Sometimes, they didn't want to wait for hunger. That's when they turned to their engineers. In 1209, during the war against the Western Xia, the Great Khan faced the capital city of Yinchuan. The walls were massive. The defenders were stubborn. So, Genghis Khan looked at the river flowing nearby. He didn't see water. He saw a weapon. He ordered his army to build a massive system of dams and dikes. They redirected the entire flow of the river toward the city walls. This wasn't just a flood, it was a liquid battering ram. The water crashed through the defenses, turning the streets into rivers of mud and drowning thousands in their own homes. The Mongols stood on the high ground and watched. To them, the lives of an entire city were just a variable in an equation of fluid dynamics. In 1221, at the city of Urgench, they did it again, but with even more malice. The city had already surrendered. The fighting was over. The people thought they were safe. But the Mongols were unsatisfied with the resistance they had faced. They destroyed the dams of the Amu Darya River, sending a wall of water into the ruins. Every survivor, every child hiding in a cellar, every wounded soldier was washed away. The Mongols understood something other conquerors missed. A sword can be blocked. A shield can be held. But you cannot fight a river. You cannot breathe in a flooded basement. By using the earth itself as a weapon, they sent a message to every king in the world. Even the gods of nature take our side. When the Mongols finally entered a city, the chaos of war was replaced by something much more terrifying: order. They were not interested in a messy riot or random looting. They organized mass murder with the efficiency of a modern assembly line. This was the cold calculus of the steppe. To the Mongol commanders, a captured population was simply a resource to be processed. They would force the entire population out into an open field outside the city walls. This was a psychological masterstroke. In the open, there was nowhere to hide. No alleys, no basements, no shadows. They would then begin the sorting process. They looked at the thousands of trembling people not as humans, but as categories. The first category was the useful. Blacksmiths, engineers, and weavers were separated. These people were too valuable to kill. They were enslaved and marched across thousands of miles to the heart of Mongolia to build the Khan's palaces. The second category was the strong. Young men of fighting age were forced into the Mongol Army's front lines. In the next siege, these men would be the ones pushed toward the walls first, forced to fight and die against their own countrymen while the Mongols watched from the rear. Everyone else, the elderly, the sick, and those without a trade, was marked for the third category, the waste. In 1221, at the city of Nishapur, the Mongols achieved a level of systematic slaughter that defies logic. Historical accounts claim that after the city fell, the Mongol soldiers were given a quota. This wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. Each soldier was commanded to execute a specific number of people. Some historians suggest the number was as high as 300 to 400 people per soldier. Imagine the mechanical nature of this act. A soldier doesn't kill 400 people out of anger. He does it like a laborer chopping wood. Strike. Move on. Strike. Move on. The Mongols didn't want to leave a single soul alive to tell the story of resistance. In Nishapur, they even killed the cats and the dogs. They wanted the silence to be total. To prove they had completed their work, the soldiers would stack the heads of the dead. These weren't just piles, they were structures. They built massive pyramids out of human skulls. They made separate pyramids for men, women, and children. These bone towers stood at the city gates for months, visible from miles away. They were billboards of bone. They told every traveler and every scout, "This is what happens when you say no to the Khan." This wasn't just a massacre, it was an advertisement. The Mongols realized that if they killed 1 million people in such a horrific way today, 10 million people would surrender without a fight tomorrow. They were willing to spend the blood of one city to buy the submission of an entire empire. Even their religious beliefs were adapted to make their executions more brutal. In Mongol culture, spilling royal blood on the ground was a sin that would offend the sky god, Tungri. This sounds like it might lead to mercy, but for the Mongols, it was just a technical challenge. They simply invented ways to kill people without making them bleed. They would wrap noble prisoners in thick carpets and have horses trample them until their bones were powder. They would sew every opening of a person's body shut and throw them into a river. They would pour molten silver into the eyes and ears of corrupt governors. By following their religious rules, they created deaths that were infinitely more agonizing than a quick blade to the throat. They turned their spiritual laws into a manual for torture. The Mongols were not content with just ending a life. To them, certain crimes, like betrayal or personal insults, required a death that lived on in the nightmares of the survivors. While their mass killings were mechanical and fast, their personal executions were slow, deliberate, and deeply symbolic. This was where the linguistic DNA of their terror became most visible. They didn't just want you dead. They wanted you to regret ever being born. Consider the fate of a Persian nobleman who had the misfortune of being captured after a particularly bitter resistance. The Mongols didn't behead him. They didn't hang him. They used the environment of the desert as their executioner. They covered his naked body in thick, heavy sheep fat. Then, they wrapped him tightly in layers of felt, a material designed to trap heat. They bound him and left him under the blistering heat of the open sun. As the hours passed, the fat began to melt, literally cooking into his skin. The felt acted like an oven, holding every degree of the desert's furnace against his body. He couldn't move. He couldn't roll into the shade. He couldn't even scream properly because the felt was pressed against his mouth. The Mongols simply sat nearby, drinking fermented milk and watching. They had all day. They wanted the message to be clear. Our patience for your rebellion is as endless as the sun. But perhaps the most infamous display of this bloodless execution occurred in 1258, during the fall of Baghdad. The city was the jewel of the Islamic world, a center of science and faith. At its head was the Caliph al-Mustasim. When the Mongols finally breached the walls, they didn't just kill him like a common soldier. They respected his royal status, but in the most horrific way imaginable. They rolled the caliph inside a thick, ornate carpet. They tied the ends shut, so he was a helpless cylinder of wool. Then, they brought in the war horses. The Mongol cavalry rode back and forth over the carpet. Every hoofbeat was a thunderclap of shattering bone. The carpet kept his royal blood from touching the earth, satisfying their religious laws, while the man inside was slowly turned into a pulp of flesh and bone. The people of Baghdad watched as the leader of their faith was erased under the hooves of steppe ponies. This wasn't just a killing, it was a desecration. It was a statement that no matter how high your status, you were nothing more than a rug beneath a Mongol horse. The Mongols also used torture to settle scores from the past. There was a wrestler named Budi who had once insulted the Khan's family. Years later, when the Mongols were in power, Budi was invited to a match. He knew he was doomed. He tried to lose on purpose, hoping humility would save him. It didn't. At a signal from the Khan, a Mongol warrior drove his knee into Budi's spine and pulled his collarbones upward with such force that the spine snapped like a dry twig. They didn't kill him then. They dragged him outside, paralyzed and broken, and left him in the dirt. He was a living statue of the Khan's memory. The Mongols never forgot a face, and they never forgot a debt. Whether it was silver poured into the eyes of a greedy governor or a spine snapped for a decade-old insult, they made sure the punishment matched the crime with terrifying precision. The Mongol Empire didn't just end lives, it ended histories. This final stage was what they called feeding the horses. It was the total liquidation of a society. When a city resisted for too long or killed a member of the Khan's family, the Mongols didn't just punish the people. They erased the footprint of the civilization. This was the ultimate method on their list, the deletion of reality. In 1221, the city of Merv was one of the greatest metropolises on earth. It was a center of learning, filled with libraries, palaces, and over 1 million souls. After the city fell, the Mongols didn't just loot it. They organized a slaughter so vast that it redefined the capacity for human cruelty. Genghis Khan himself sat on a golden throne and watched as his soldiers brought the citizens out in blocks. He watched as they were systematically executed, one by one, for days on end. Once the people were dead, the Mongols turned their attention to the city itself. They didn't just burn buildings, they dismantled them. They wanted to make sure that if a traveler came by a year later, they wouldn't even be able to tell that a city had ever stood there. They burned the libraries of Merv and Baghdad, throwing so many books into the rivers that the water turned black with the ink of lost knowledge. Centuries of science, poetry, and philosophy vanished in a single afternoon. To the Mongols, the written word was just another fuel for their fires. This was the Great Silence. It was a psychological weapon that worked on a global scale. Word of the total erasure of cities like Merv and Nishapur traveled faster than the Mongol horses. When the Mongol scouts arrived at the next kingdom, they didn't even have to fight. They would simply point back toward the horizon where a great city used to be. The kings of those lands would look at the empty space on the map and open their gates. This was the cold, calculated genius of the Mongol machine. They used 40 million deaths to buy a peace that lasted for over a century, a period historians call the Pax Mongolica. They made the world so terrified of their shadow that a person could supposedly walk from one end of the empire to the other with a gold plate on their head and never be robbed. But that safety was built on a foundation of bone. It was a peace maintained by the memory of skull pyramids and flooded cities. By the time the empire reached its peak, it covered 24 million square kilometers. It was the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Every mile of that territory was governed by the same linguistic DNA of terror. The message was simple: submission is life. Resistance is erasure. The Mongols proved that fear is the most effective currency in the world. They didn't need to stay in every city to rule it. They just needed to leave enough ghosts behind. Even today, 700 years later, the scars of their conquest are visible in the genetics of the population and the ruins in the desert. They were the ultimate architects of death, an army that treated the world like a ledger and settled every account in blood. The sound of the Mongol horse hooves eventually faded into history, but the silence they left behind in the 13th century still echoes. They didn't just change the world. They broke it and rebuilt it in their own terrifying image. And that is why, even today, the name of the Khan is synonymous with the end of the world. If you enjoy dark, untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.